Hi everybody, welcome back to Arma Reforger, and I wanted to do a video specifically aimed at the new PlayStation community server owners who have joined our community over the last couple of weeks to go through some of the basics about how servers work and how to add mods as well. Now, I've done loads of videos like this for PC and Xbox, and basically everything that I've really done for PC and Xbox does apply to PlayStation, but I just wanted to do a fresh video just to kind of for the new people out there, so you've got an example of what can kind of go on. Now, what I would recommend is when you get started off with running your own community server, and you probably want to run it because you want a private place where you and your friends can jump into a game of Conflict or Game Master or a custom scenario, where you don't need to be bothered by other players, and you can set a password and all that sort of stuff. So I'd always recommend start off with a 10 slot server. Start off with something really small and get used to it, and just take it out for 30 days. And if you enjoy it and if you use it, great. And if you don't, if you think actually, I'd rather just play community servers owned by other people or vanilla servers, then you haven't lost too much. Right, so let's have a look at this. What I've done is I've done a reinstall on my Arma Reforger server for Nitrado, just so we can kind of look at some of the things that are involved on the server. So we've got stop and restart at the top. Generally, when we're messing around with our server, we want to stop it. That's kind of a thing we want to do. Then if we go to general settings, this is where we're going to kind of start off. So the first thing you'll probably want to change is your server name. So I'm going to change mine to scale speeders test server. Set a password. So my password will be password. I will be changing that. Now this is really important, your admin password. Now when you go into a game of Game Master or a game of Conflict or any game mode, you can use the in-game chat to log in. And basically, you bring up the chat box and you type hash login, and then your admin password, and that will then give you Game Master privileges. And this is really important, especially when you're playing with friends in a Game Master scenario, because it means that when you log onto the server, you can become the Game Master. But also when you're playing games of Conflict, because it means you can log in and then you can spawn different things around the world. So make sure you set a admin password. That's super, super, super important. In the link in the description below this video, I'll put a link to this video which tells you how to log in. It's a little bit old, but it should still be the same. You might have to check the instructions in the game as to how you open up the chat box on your PlayStation, because unfortunately I haven't got a PlayStation 5 to make these videos on. But you do that, you open up and do hash login, then your admin password, and then you'll have Game Master rights, which is really important. As we come down, then we've now got what scenario is going to be running on our server. So we've got all these different things that you can choose: Conflict on Everon, Combat Ops on Everon, Game Master Everon, all of these vanilla settings that you can put in. I'd imagine probably you're maybe going to be running Game Master quite a lot. Game Master is really cool because it gives you the option to spawn into an empty map, and then you can load in custom Game Master scenarios if you wanted to, or you can make your own scenario. You can work through it that way. I wouldn't really bother with the FPS visibility on. Again, admins, I don't really have that set on at all. I would just use the Game Master, because you don't. I guess if you really get into this and you're running like 40, 60 person servers, you may well have some admins, and then you'll want to have cross play on, and then you've got your view distance and something like that. But we can just save that, and that will then have saved. Now, the way that this is kind of working is these settings we're changing, they're actually editing a file for us. Now I try to make this really easy, but we can look at that file directly if we click on config files down here, which will take us to this screen. Let me just refresh it. And if we go and look at this file, this is really the engine of your server, and the things we just changed on the other page are actually there. So there's my name, there's the password, there's the admin password, and there's the scenario ID as well. They give it a funny name, But that's what we've done here. And then we've got things like the view distance and things like that. And down here we've got cross-platform is on. So that's really cool. So that's kind of the server language of what the general settings are under. And this is called config.json. When you start getting into server maintenance with other, say, DAISY and things like that as well, is you get lots of configs and JSONs and XMLs and stuff like that. The important thing to remember is when you're editing these files is that you have to get the syntax right. And the syntax is another word for the combination of spelling and punctuation. So all these things you see here with like commas and these funny squiggly brackets, they're really important that you put them in the right places, because if you miss off a comma or a squiggly bracket or a quotation mark or something like that, the server probably won't work and may well go into a restart loop. So what we do is, if we'd make any change, we could save changes and literally give it 5 minutes, go into the server browser on your PlayStation, and your server will be there, and you'll be able to jump onto it with your friends, put in the password, and you can be playing that. However, now I hear you saying, well, what about mods? We want to add some mods to our server. Now, in the description below this video as well, you'll find a link to this page. Now, this is the official server config guide for Arma Reforger. Now, it can be a little bit complicated, but read through it at your leisure with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. What we're interested in, though, is right down the bottom where you have these templates. And it will probably look like this right down the bottom. So what you want to do is you want to click on Show Example Configuration. And this is an example server config file. And what we're really interested in is, if we scroll down, is this section here, the mod section, because this tells us the format that we need to write mods in order to get them working on our server. One thing I will say about this is the way that we have to do this on PlayStation and Xbox is a little bit of a pain, okay, compared to the way that we do it on PC. On PC, we can copy and paste from the workshop and do wonderful things. You can see that in some of the other videos. In this particular way of doing it, we do have to do a lot of copy and pasting, but it's very easy to make mistakes. So before we get started, I just want to point out some things. So in our config.json file, we can see there's no mods on the server yet. So in the line that says mods, we've got mods, and then we've got the opening and closing square brackets that you can see there. So let's look at the example here. If we look at this example, we've got mods, there's the opening bracket, and there's the closing square bracket, and then we've got our mods in between. And in this particular example, there's two mods. We've got the weapon switching mod and explosive goats beta as well. And what you can see is each description of the mod is enclosed within these squiggly brackets. So you've got an open squiggly bracket, then it says the mod ID and it gives you a number. Then it says the name and then gives you a name, and then the version number with the version number, close squiggly brackets, and then a comma. Then in the next mod, it's similar but not quite the same. So we have the opening and closing squiggly brackets, mod ID, name, version. But if you notice, there's no comma after the last closing squiggly bracket. So that's really important. So start thinking about these things, and when you see them, go, right, okay, but this is the format we need to do. So the mod entries are going to go in between the square brackets that we see here. So in fact, what we can do now is if we were to, let's just stop our server. So it's always a good idea to stop your server when you muck around with things. And then we can put some spaces in there. There we go. So we're kind of ready for the mods. So the next question is, okay, that's fine, Rob, but how do we get these details about the mods? Well, what we're going to do, we're actually going to put on some really simple mods. So the way that you can get mod IDs is if you go to the Arma Reforger online workshop, and again, in the description below this video, you'll find it. And we can have a look through some mods. I guess a question I can't really answer is, which mods should you install? Yeah, because we're going to do some common ones in this particular example, but I guess sometimes you got to think about what changes do you want to make to your server. But at this point, when you're fairly new, you probably don't even know what changes you really want to make. So let's start with the most common mod that is installed on every single community server, whereami. So this really cool mod means that when you open up the map, instead of having to try and figure out where you are, looking at what it says on the map and looking at landmarks and stuff like that, there's just a red circle that says you're here. Superb. Don't understand why it's in the game. Not in the game. So if we have a look in here, there's loads of interesting facts about when it was last updated. That's really important. If a mod hasn't been updated for a long time, it might not work anymore. Always read the instructions, because there could be something in here that says, you know, you need to do this. Also, you might often find a link to a Discord here, which is really important, because you can go there, and if you're having trouble, there'll be lots of other people who are probably having the same trouble, and you can read their questions and answers or post your own. Most importantly, though, there's the ID of the mod. So what we can do is, if we just go over here, let's just copy this first mod from here, like that. Let's just copy that. Let's go back to our server and let's just paste it in like that. So there's our mod. Now we've just copied it over. So now what we can do is, we know that's the mod ID, so we can hit this copy button like that. Copy ID to clipboard. And then we could just put that over the top. We can paste that. Then we could put in, where am I? Now the version number is a funny one. I recommend, as a best practice, to not put in the version number, to leave it empty with just the 2 quotation marks. This will mean the server will always try and use the latest version of the mod. Now, you could well have situations where you have compatibility problems, where, say, you're running a few mods and the mods are dependent on each other. And it could be that a particular mod needs a particular version of another mod to work. And in that case, there may be an argument for keeping the version number. But what's more likely to happen is, as the mod gets updated and you don't update the version number on your server, because you'd have to do that manually, every time someone tries to join your server, they're going to have to download an older version of the mod. So say with whereami, when it gets updated, if we have an old version, every time someone comes in, they'll have to download it. Doesn't matter too much with smaller mods, but with bigger mods, that can be a real pain. So I would say always leave it with nothing on. Now, what we're going to do, if we were just going to have this one mod, whereami, we could get rid of that comma, save changes, start the server or restart the server, and then when our players jumped into this particular server, your PS5 would then download the whereami mod if you haven't got it already, and you'd be playing with it. How easy is that? It's fantastic. But let's add another mod. So let's put a comma in there, and let's scroll down a bit. And another mod that you may well want to put in, especially when you're playing with friends, is conflict lieutenant at start. So the beauty with beauty with this one is that you're a lieutenant when you start, so you can get things like sniper rifles and stuff like that. So what we can do is, if we go back to here, we could simply copy the entry for this mod, like so, and we could paste it into there. Go to here, click on the copy the ID, go back to here, paste the ID over the top very carefully. So this one is ltatstart. There we go. And this is the last mod, so there's a comma there, but there's not a comma there. Save changes, restart server, and then people would have conflict lieutenant at start. Nice and easy. Now let's have a look at something a little bit more complicated. Here we go. Let's have a look at the Project Redline UH-60, so the Black Hawk helicopter. Let's say you wanted to install this particular mod on your server. Now, there's a couple of things to watch out for on this one. There's the mod ID. If we can scroll down, we've got this big long description that gives us some instructions on how to fly it as well. There's some updates, so you can look at what's changed in the mod, just in case there's an error or something they're warning you about. See if they've got a Discord link at the bottom. No, I can't see a Discord link there. But what's really important, this is something people miss, is dependencies. So in order for Project Redline UH-60 to work, you must have this other mod as well. So let's open this one up. We need to have Project Redline Core. And we can read all about this. Now this one hasn't got any other dependencies, but there's the ID. And you'll find this with lots of vehicle and aircraft mods, is that there'll be a core mod that the other mods use as a basis for the mechanics of what they're doing. So like, say someone's making some mods about some tanks, and there's several different types of tanks in different mods. They'll probably have their base core tank mod, and then the other ones use that as well. So we must make sure we have the dependencies as well. So we know in this particular case that to get the U860 we need to have the U860 mod, and we need to have the Project Redline core mod. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our server, and what we'll do is we'll put it after these. So let's put a little comma in there like that. And then we know it's 2 mods, so we're going to be very careful. We're going to copy that. We're going to put in another space. We're going to paste that in. And then we're going to get rid of that comma there. So we know there are copies that we can work with. So let's go to Project Redline U860. So let's copy that. Let's put that in there. Like so. And that's the... what do they call that one? So PRU860 we'll call it. PRU860. We'll leave the version as like that, and then let's go to the Project Redline core. So let's get that one. Go back to our server. Paste that one in. We'll call that PR core. And we'd save the changes, restart the server, start the server, and that would happen. Now, we're getting pretty complicated at the moment. We're making lots of changes. So one of the things you want to start doing, and again, there'll be a link to this website in the description below the video, is we want to validate our config file. Now, by validating, what this website's going to do, it's going to check the syntax, it's going to check the spelling and the punctuation of the file that we've created. And believe me, it's very, very, very easy to make a mistake with these things. Your server stops working, it goes into a restart loop, for example, and you don't know what's going on. So always, always, always validate your file. So we're going to download that one. So that's downloaded. So now I'm going to go here, I'm going to browse. Go to downloads, open up that one. Now make sure that fix.json isn't ticked, because we want to see where the error is if there is one. We're going to click process. It's valid. Now if it wasn't valid, if there was a mistake, we could scroll down and you'd see a little red, 2 little red bits on there. 9 times out of 10 it'll be a missing comma, or it'll be an additional comma, or a missing quotation mark. It'll be something like that. This is a really good best practice to get settled with, that whenever you do any edits, come along and validate your file, and you can make sure it's all working. So far we've kind of worked on mods that will just add things into the game, like on the map it tells you where you are, allows you to start as a lieutenant so you can get the other stuff. And then we've also looked at things like adding the helicopter to it as well. But what happens if you want to add, say, a different map to the game? And not only a different map, but a different scenario. So this is another sort of thing that happens. So what we'll do is, if we have a look at the Worthy Islands map by Chewy, really, really nice map, this one. Absolutely fantastic piece of work. What we can see is, what's cool about this one actually is that there's no other dependencies that it needs. There's the mod ID. But the different scenarios are going to be up here. So whenever you have a different terrain, often it's called, or a different map, you need to have a different scenario. So the game master scenario for Everon or Ireland won't work on here, or the conflict won't. So if you click on scenarios here, this is where you can see the different scenarios. Now, different maps will have different scenarios available to you, and there may well not be every single scenario for that you might need for every single terrain. It could be that in the workshop somebody else makes a scenario for it. But we're going to keep things simple here in the fact that we're going to ask our server to install the Worthy Islands map, and we're going to install the Worthy Islands Game Master mode. That's nice and easy, isn't it? So let's go back to info. Let's scroll down, have a look here. Now, Chewy does have a Discord. Discords are gold. So click through to that, join the Discord. That way, if you've got any troubles that about installing it or problems, you can see if other people have got the same problems. And remember, when you do go to a fresh Discord, use the search box before you start asking for questions. Because they may well have already been answered. So do that anyway. So here we go. So let's go back to our server. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add another line in here. So we're going to copy that one. We're going to put a comma in there because we know we need a comma. And we're going to paste that one in. And we know after the last mod, we're not going to have a comma. So we're going to go to Worthy Islands. We're going to get the mod ID off here. And then we're going to paste that over the top. Like so. And then we're going to call this Worthy Isle. Like that. Version we're going to leave blank. But if we just saved this and restarted, the scenario would be wrong. Because it wants to try and use the Game Master for Everon. Which wouldn't work. So what we do is we click on scenarios here. And we want the Game Master scenario. And if you look at the way that it's formatted, you've got squiggly opening bracket and then ends in m.conf. So if we have a look on here, we can see the scenario ID here starts with squiggly bracket and ends with conf, but it's surrounded by the inverted commas or the quotation marks. So we just need to respect that syntax. So let's copy that, go back to our server, and just paste that like so. Ooh, I see I almost went over those inverted commas then, didn't I? And that's like that. That's ready to go. So we would save changes and restart our server. In fact, I tell you what, we are going to save these changes like that. Now, we would save the change and we would then start the server and then we could go in and check it. As soon as you know this is working, so you go into your PlayStation, and you log in and it works, and you're like, phew, thank for that. Make sure you go to configuration profiles here and make sure you create a new config profile. So we call this Worthy Islands, and we create that. There we go. Because that means what I can do, if we look at all these, you can see I've got config files for Worthy Islands, Takistan, Vanilla Everon Conflict, Arma Field, Daisy Reforged, Conflict no AI. I've got all of these there. Now, they're not always going to work because mods are going to get updated and dependencies are going to change. That's the big thing that often happens is a mod suddenly needs another dependency or doesn't need it anymore. And that's where these older config.jsons would fail. But this can save you an awful lot of time because all these are just different saved versions of the config.json that we could go through. But let's go back to our config file there. Go on. Here it comes. Right, there you go. So just to make sure we are there. And that is all there, ready to go. Now, what you'll also find in the description below this video is I'll put some links to my troubleshooting videos as well. I know at the moment there does seem to be a problem. See if we can bring it up. Let's start the server. Is it here? So there's this problem at the moment with Nitrado where it says modded scenarios are unavailable to select at this time because the workshop returned an error. Now normally that refers to here. Oh no, so it has popped up there, so that should be okay. So, but if you are having a problem with your server, always have a look on the main page just to check that Nitrado aren't having a problem. Make sure as well is that you start really, really simple. Start with where am I? Honestly, just start with that. Get your conflict server fired up or get your Game Master server fired up with just where am I. Spawn in, look at the map, it tells you where you are. Brilliant. And Lieutenant at start, brilliant. Start at that particular point. Try changing the scenario from Everon Game Master to Ireland Game Master, or to conflict Arlen or something like that, and then just go and have a look at it and get used to these really simple changes that you're doing. Get used to using the JSON validator to check your files. And then when you do something like install another map, like Worthy Isle, and then you remember to change the scenario ID, don't have any other mods in, just have those on it, and then go in and check that it works. It works, fantastic. Then add Where Am I? The worst thing you can do is go through the workshop and just go through, say, the most popular mods and just start adding everything in, because chances are it's not going to work. Something's going to clash, and you do get lots of things like that. Just remember, Arma Reforger is being updated all of the time, and it can be very frustrating and very difficult to find out what's going on. So keep it simple to start off with. And if you do run into a problem where your server stops working, roll back, take some of the mods off that you've installed, do a restart. If you get really, really stuck, you can always do a reinstall, because it only takes 5 minutes to do. So there we go. So hopefully you found this video useful. I've tried to just go over the simple stuff. And remember, lots of my older videos about PC and Xbox, Arma Reforger server modding, they all work. It's all the same stuff, it's just the buttons are slightly different. If anybody out there wants to buy me a PlayStation 5 so that I can make videos specifically on it, then just email me, scalespirit@gmail.com, and I'm sure we'll be able to sort something out. Anyway, if you have found this useful, hit like. If you want to see more of the same, press subscribe, and of course I'll see you again soon.